because obviously we have had time to spend with family. Do you see your chat down below, guys? If you go on the more section, you'll see chat. Should be that way so that you guys can have access to this slide deck. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Heather Hilz-Fitzgerald. I am the EdTech instructional coach within the Romoland School District. Romoland School District is located within Southern California. We are nestled in between Temecula and Riverside. And so we're a very small district. We have only 5 schools, and one of them being a middle school, but we are a 1-to-1 school district grades 3 through 8, and then 2-to-1 for TK through 1st. And so today we're going to really be talking about inclusion and how now that we are transferring over to an online learning platform, possibly in the fall, or some type of a hybrid model. There's obviously a lot of ways that we're going to have to start transitioning our learning for ourselves and for our students. But today's going to be an opportunity to explore really deeply into who our students are and their needs. And so I hope you enjoy kind of collecting some of these ideas that I'm going to be presenting, and they're ideas that are not only, based on educational technology concepts, but they're ideas that are to help support students, all learners. Okay. Hi, Perlita, San Jose. Nice, 4th grade. I taught, that was my first year of teaching was 4th grade, and absolutely one of my favorite because obviously I love the historical content from it, and I just think that's like such a really great age, because after that I taught 5th grade for about 5 years, and they change a lot when they get to 5th grade. They love you a little bit more in 4th grade. But no, I love all my students, and actually I get to visit them quite frequently within the middle school, and that's so exciting. Oh, no worries, Alyssa. Don't even worry about it. I know for some reason I was having some trouble with Zoom today too, so hopefully I'll hear your voice in a little bit. So again, since we're talking about inclusive spaces for students, we're really going to start thinking about accessibility for all. And this has been something I've been extremely passionate about ever since I've gotten into teaching, because I know for myself, even though I've been an avid learner, I've always at times struggled with my learning in the sense of I didn't always learn it the way that maybe my instructors wanted me to learn about or learn in that manner. So I've always told my students that, I struggled with multiplication, or there were times where I didn't know how to, complete my work as my teachers wanted. So being aware that we are now kind of really focusing on accessibility and understanding who our students are is it's so heartwarming, and it's necessary for all of our students to be successful. So what I wanted to go ahead and do is share with you, this is actually some information that comes from Microsoft Education. And these are kind of the areas that we really think about when we think about students who might have disabilities. And I want us to really start kind of viewing accessibility not only for students with disabilities, but even for students who aren't necessarily documented with an IEP or a 504. So obviously, if you're thinking about a student, not always are you going to visually see a disability. They might be unseen. And so knowing your students is probably one of the best ways that you can start the year off, based on what their needs are, what supports might they have, and just have that empathetic perspective of who your students are and how you can best support them throughout the year. And I know this, you've probably been educators for quite a while. Even in your first few years, you see that there's so many different types of learners. And there's probably times that you have created learning experiences for those learners in real time, in that moment, that will help support them to be successful. So an area that I want to touch on that is very dear to my heart, again, is inclusion. And so about 5 years ago, I was presented with the idea to work with a co-teacher of mine who is considered to be a specialized academic instructor. Within our district, we've graduated to that terminology rather than RSP or SDC. And specialized academic instruction is really just giving students with IEPs or 504s the ability to have most of their classroom time spent within the general education environment. And what we've noticed is that there really was a drastic change, not only in the students with IEPs or 504s, but we saw a drastic change with our students who were just general education students. So what happened is no longer were the students rostered to her as being in like a separate learning center type of environment. Instead, students were listed on the Gen Ed roster. So it really made it, it made it solid as to why these students needed to be with us. It's obvious they need to be in a general ed classroom, because ultimately we really want to expose them to grade level standards. And obviously you do the modifications and accommodations as they come, and you think about what their IEP goals are. But I will tell you, what was the most valuable experience in all of that is not only the academic support that those students received, but it was also a way that all of the students in the classroom were able to develop patience, tolerance, acceptance, and empathy for the diverse learners we had in our classroom. So just as you all have diverse learners in your own classroom, we need to start looking through the lens of how can we include all and how can we support all. So that being said, we're gonna go ahead and look at, I think it's like a common trend for me all the time now, is that I'm really seeing that what is being stated out in, you know, webinar world and, you know, research world when it comes to this new distance and online learning for our students, is that the connections are first key. Communicating with your students on a daily basis, communicating with parents who are pretty much the facilitators of learning when they're at home with them, but really getting that communication and collaboration happening quite often with your students on a daily basis. So some of these apps that I went ahead and incorporated here are Mentimeter, Quizzes, Kahoot, which, you know, a lot of us are probably familiar with as a way to either assess, but think of those as ways to also engage your students. You could do a quick quizzes search and find fun type of competitive games that your students could play. And then also thinking about, just ideas of sharing games and whatnot when you're having those Google Meets. I actually just got off a meeting with my district. We're leading into our summer school, and obviously it's all going to be online. And this was one of the key areas that we really hit on with our teachers, is that, obviously when you have that Google Meet time, a mini lesson is probably going to be necessary, right? To reaffirm what type of standards you're trying to have your students master. But from there, let's try to infuse these fun activities so the students want to be there. Maybe tie it back to whatever topic you're studying, but really just trying to make them feel welcome and make them feel heard. I think that's a key ingredient when it comes to motivation. Alyssa, does your speaker work now?
It does, thank you.
Good. So have you transitioned to distance learning through all of this? Were you supporting your students through distance learning?
Yes, I did. I'm learning a lot of this online, but I need to practice, and that's why I'm here. Hopefully,
Wonderful.
I'm not sure if we can get the recorded
Yes.
sessions. Yes, if I could request from the first session on, I will review it.
So all of these have been recorded, and so the individual who is organizing all of this, she had stated to me in an email that all of these are going to be recorded sessions, and then all of the materials from previous sessions are going to be collected. So those will probably be housed for you all to interact with at a later date.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, connections are key. Being present with your students on a daily basis. And also even don't forget your families. This is a little tip that I heard from a fellow educator, Kim Vogie. What she does is at the beginning of the week, she will record herself going over her weekly learning plan and kind of just, explaining what the different tasks are for the day. That way parents can go and review that video. Try to keep it under 2 minutes, just a quick overview, but parents were very appreciative to have that video overview of the week so that they could reflect and or know what their students needed to be successful. So because we're talking about inclusion and we're really thinking about our students with disabilities and just all of our students who have unique and diverse learning needs, because even your general education students need specific, they may need a different type of method of instruction, or they might need a different type of application to have them be successful. So I really wanted to bring in this concept right here. This is called POUR. And so POUR is really just an acronym that's going to help support teachers when it comes to accessibility for their learning online. And because sometimes we as educators have these grand ideas in our head of, the lesson and the instruction and the execution of what the students are going to be, eventually creating. But we really need to think about almost the design principle about what we're pushing out onto an online platform. And probably many of us are using Google Classroom. Yes, Google Classroom as the core.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so with POUR, the first thing is that we really need to think about perceivable and being very specific as how we're going to design the space. So thinking about visuals. What do the colors look like? The font sizes. Are we providing video captions that explain the instructions? Those types of things are important when we're pushing out activities. Yes, Pralitha, I am in love with Seesaw. She just posted in the chat because it is so accessible. It's definitely based on that UDL, voice and choice. Students not only have their teachers giving instructions of what the task is, but then the task is definitely interactive, however they push out what they want them to accomplish. And then students also have the option to, when submitting, they could they could talk about what they're sharing, or they could write or draw. So Seesaw is a very great tool. Other things that are to be mentioned are operable. So thinking of our students maybe with a 504 plan, who, you know, are maybe getting services for occupational therapy, being mindful that if we may need to modify or accommodate some of those lessons, that would be something that we need to step in and do to personalize. Again, that understandable concept, less is more, okay? And one of the sessions I attended a few weeks back when, or like a couple months actually now, when this all happened, is that we need to be specific of what our learning targets are, you know, stem from our standards, and then less is more. So thinking about what you're going to put out, cut it in half, and then cut it in half again, and make that learning much more meaningful. So not a bunch of busy work, not a bunch of tasks. What do I really want to get them involved with? And then robust. What type of learning applications are going to be helpful? What type of extensions on Google are going to also be helpful as well, that will make the students be able to interact with the learning in front of them. So I kind of fed into this idea of that UDL when Pralitha brought up Seesaw, but right before we were going, right before closures hit for our district, we were beginning to really transition into the concept of universal design learning, which is obviously not a new concept. It's been around, you know, probably years ago. And ultimately, we're looking at how are we going to design learning experiences that are going to meet the needs of all students. And so this right here is when you have access to this slide deck, this is going to be hyperlinked, and it'll take you into what it looks like when we're activating each part of the brain. So we really want to engage our students. We want to provide them with representation, whether that is models or actual instruction. And then we want our students to eventually create through that action and expression. So when we're thinking about designing these learning experiences online, rather than just pushing out a bunch of tasks or, hey, go do iReady and let it just choose what it needs to choose for you based on your abilities, how are you going to craft learning so that each of the students are getting some type of engagement, some type of instruction that meets their needs, and then allowing for them to go ahead and create what they think is valuable or valid of their learning. So I want to share a video. This is, oh no, let's see if I can do it here. This is my co-teacher, and she's
Hi everybody.
Explaining.
So I couldn't be there with you today because I'm in my own special ed department meeting, but Ms. Hilz asked me to let you know a little bit of what I did yesterday or the last 2 days. I went to a UDL conference, which is Universal Design Learning, and they talked about how it is for all students. So of course, me being the SAI, I'm going to talk about inclusion. Just a little snippet. So many of you already know it. Those of you who work with me love it. So what can I say? So anyways, I'm going to tell you what inclusive education is not. It is not mainstreaming. No. It is not dumping a student in a gen ed class and leaving them there and expecting the gen ed teacher to do everything. Nope. And you can ask my teachers, that is not how it's done. Second of all, students are primarily grouped in heterogeneous mixed ability groups. So it's all students. So UDL is just basically a way to include all students in all learning. And it is about the teacher talking with the students, asking the students what they need. It's what they need to be successful in their own learning. So it's basically giving the students a lot of choices and being able to show their knowledge through different ways. So not just all one way. I know we're all stuck on tests, and I know we have to do that, but if you really want to, and I will tell you this, inclusion is coming, whether anyone likes it or not, which nobody should say they don't like it. Okay, sorry, that was Juanita on the speaker. So anyways, what it is, inclusive education is both a vision, and a practice. You gotta believe it. You gotta know it. All children can learn. We already know that. All children can and will. Do they learn at the same rate? No. Do they learn the same way? No. So UDL basically is saying how to give up a little bit of that control, which can be hard. But if you think of it this way, a teacher's not giving up her control or his control. You still remain management. You still manage your class. You still manage the learning, but you let them decide how is best for themselves to learn. So anyways, that's a little snippet. I really enjoyed it, and I hope to bring it to my teachers that I do work with. And if I don't work with you, I'm sorry. But anyways, if you ever want to ask me anything about anything I do or any of my great teachers, just ask. Have a good.
So that is my previous co-teacher, Miss Anna Cole, and I'll get into a little bit more of her and I's teaching relationship in a little bit. But she did a really great job of just kind of overviewing of what that looks like. And because she is a SAI teacher, you know, she has a large caseload of students with IEPs. So she really wanted to voice to teachers that we need to look at our instructional practices in a different way in order to make them successful, in order to make it relevant to their learning. So moving on, because we know we have all different types of learners, we need to then think about, okay, so they have access to this Chromebook now, but how are they all going to be successful on this Chromebook if, say, they have hearing impairment, or maybe just for themselves dislike typing. So I went ahead and I shared this item here, and I'm gonna go, because I know you guys aren't on this actual slide deck right now, so I'm going to go into the site that is available to all educators on open access. But this was an absolute eye-opener as to what we as educators have available to us to help support all of our learners. And think not only your students with IEPs, but think about your students who just need that extra support to either be motivated or to feel confident in their learning. So this is off of open access I guess that's a little dash ca.org, and they have really great resources here. But what they've done is they've curated all of these extensions and or applications that will make your students successful. So as we go through here, I'll kind of point out a few that I really like. Read and Write. You can get a free premium subscription. It does work best with Google Chrome, but it ultimately gives you tools for your students to either have the screen read to them. It changes the text to possibly the Lexile level that they are more confident in. It has highlighting tools, annotation tools, just a really great source for kids to interact with maybe some literature that they're getting off of their screen. Voice talk typing within Google as an extension was probably one of my favorites amongst my students, especially my students who had either delays in areas of expressing themselves when it comes to written word, right? And maybe poor penmanship. So allowing them to express themselves through voice and, create an informational report, write a narrative with their voice. So one really great addition. And so like if you're with your students in real time, this would be a great opportunity for you to, I would say, model at the beginning of the school year to add on these extensions. And or if you are, teaching remotely, then a possibility would also be for you to screencastify and model yourself going ahead and adding these into your Chrome extension so that they can figure it out how to do it in their Chrome extension as well. Translate's obviously a beneficial tool for not only our students, but for our family members. Screencastify is one of my favorite tools. This is going to be your go-to tool when it comes to recording mini lessons. They even give you an option for a little whiteboard on there if you're going to do some type of a drawn type of response. But it just goes on and on. Different tools that aren't just like an added, because you have so many instructional applications out there that I will say are a little fluffy, a little foofy, maybe not necessarily meaningful, but these are definitely a list of meaningful things that could translate later on in life into, their careers. Jamboard, is Jamboard on here? Jamboard's a really great one too. Okay. Yeah, they're so cool, huh, Perlita? I love that site. I love it. So cool, good. And I'm not actually using I'm not usually using my work computer right now. So I have all those extensions on my Chrome, and a lot of times they can be helpful for even you as an educator. So I'm going to move into the next area, which is your Google support. Because most of the time when I'm working with educators, they are Google affiliated districts because the Chromebooks are the way to go with your students. But know that Google is there to support you along the way with your students, because this is hyperlinked here, but they have really carved out every possible area of how we can support students, whether they're developing Chrome extensions for students with disabilities, or maybe they're writing articles to let people know, what to be aware of when we're talking about our different learners in the classroom. One thing I did want to go ahead and click on right here that is going to be available is this resource from Google. And these are actually called accessibility feature flashcards. So this could be something you even, push out to your families at the beginning of the year, because it'll allow them to make the modifications if needed. And I even know from, just experience with students messing around with the Chromebooks, adding little extensions, and sometimes they make their keyboard switch to international mode, or they've turned off their screen of some sort. They can definitely get in here and start messing with those types of features. That way they can get back on track. So you notice that they have handwriting recognition available. They show you how to access the text to speech. They give information about dyslexia, which we know is actually a really high population of our students. However, they are not, designated as dyslexic. We have color supports if necessary. This is something that would probably be definitely within, your special education department if they would, want to do something like that. But just a good way to get your families and even yourself caught up on what can I do to make learning easier and attainable for your students. So we have to love the Google. When you do have access to this presentation, you'll notice that each of these also include probably some of your really nice go-to Google supports when it comes to accessibility. So feel free to peruse those. I kind of went through and narrowed down some of the key players. Okay, so going back to that lady who was in the video, her name's Anna Cole. She and I, like I said, 5 years ago, embarked in a co-teaching relationship, she being specialized academic instructor, me being the gen ed teacher. And so what I think would be really beneficial, and this is talks amongst lots of educators, is that we're gonna really have to band together as teachers and as administrators and staff and support one another during this time as to how we're going to change some of our instructional practices. And so when you are, when you have students with either disabilities or students with different learning needs, why wouldn't it be a grand thing to have a second teacher in the classroom with you? you are able to co-teach lessons together simultaneously. You are able to share expertise in areas that you may not be strong in, that person may be. You know, my lens was always a gen ed lens, and also I did have the cluster of GATE students. So I was always kind of doing this rigorous, intense, over-the-top instructional practice in my classroom, but a lot of times Anna was able to shed light as to, you have other learners, and this is what would be beneficial for them. You also get that shared mentorship of students, which I think was probably one of the most valuable things that we had, because a lot of our students have, you know, social emotional deficiencies. They need those model adults to be kind of that light in their life. And so we were able to do that together, and we were able to collaborate. Two minds are better than one. And I really believe that, you know, there are times when I think I know everything, and then I get so excited when I get to, you know, be one-on-one or be in a group of teachers to share ideas. I'm going back to the chat. I see Perlita has also talked about, we can also place all those sites on Symbaloo. Yes, I've never really jumped into the Symbaloo thing before. I was exposed to it years ago. Maybe it's just my mind, like, you know, my crazy mind of, I'm going to put everything into Google Classroom. And I'm a big advocate too of Google slide decks as my learning templates with hyperlinks in them. But I agree, Symbaloo would be a really great visual for students to see what type of applications are going to be used on a frequent basis. So I really like that idea. Thank you for sharing that. See? Collaboration, y'all. Okay, so obviously then if you're getting that team teacher, the next thing we want to think about is what type of instructional teaming are we going to do? So when in the classroom, she and I participated in co-teaching models, and later on at one point you could watch our, you know, instruction together. It's somewhat comedic at times, but thinking about how am I going to utilize that other educator in my classroom, not just a pool for a small group, but how can we, you know, possibly have designated teaching for specific areas that, you know, she might be more of an expert at, and then I'm more of an expert at. But then again, getting really down to that juicy part of co-teaching, which would be team teaching. And in that moment, doing a lesson side by side, so that we're getting two different perspectives from our student groups, so that we can tailor the instruction in that moment. And so one thing I want to mention too, which I'm a big advocate, is blended learning. And so blended learning very much ties into the co-teaching model, because you're really thinking about using the blended approach to have technology support your students, maybe in a small group, while you're pulling other students in another small group. And then guess what? You're a co-teaching teacher pulling another small group. So really thinking about how are we strategically dividing these students up based on their needs or their abilities to give them the instruction they need to be successful. So using those bodies, those two adults to your advantage, for sure. And so what I keep thinking about too is, if we're looking at a co-teaching model at some point, you know, during all of this, you know, what is that going to look like in an online setting? You know, obviously, if you're using Google Classroom, you can definitely, you know, add your co-teacher on as a guest teacher, so that they're part of the learning as well, and giving them access to feedback and, you know, just, I remember she and I sitting in the classroom, and, you know, it was time for us to have students turn in their informational reports. So she was one person that they could conference with, and I was a second person that could conference. So just thinking about how we're going to really, really provide instruction to a deep level with less students, with these extra adults. So I guess I wanted to like end on a note of, you know, we always attend sessions. We have so many materials and resources pushed towards us, but kind of stepping back and actually thinking, how would any of this play out into our classroom? So would you, either one of you, want to go ahead and give us an idea of how your classroom might change next year, or what the online learning experience is going to look like? And if you want, you can just add it in the chat and then I can share it out. I'm gonna add your Symbaloo idea here, that's for sure. And then also the Seesaw usage for voice and choice and accessibility amongst students. And then even if there's any actions that we may want to put forth based on some of the ideas either we have gotten here today, or some of the ideas that you've probably, you know, encountered for the past few months, because I know we're all out there trying to search for best practice, right? I'm going to give you an action right here. I think because you attended today, that you are trying to create some type of actionable new instructional practices for next year. And Alyssa said, I was thinking about a class website or a way to check in. Yes, class websites have been a really great tool for teachers that I know, because it's a way to house all of your expectations and kind of like the protocols of how your class works. One thing to think about too, though, with Google Classroom, or sorry, Google Sites, that would also be a really great way for you to display student work too, because within Google Classroom, you have students obviously participating in assignments, but they're not seeing them amongst each other. So say, for example, one of the pages on your Google site would incorporate, I don't know, maybe you're studying poetry. So that would be a great way to post student work that they can go back and look at. That would be really nice. But class websites are a definite. Like I'm a parent, and if a teacher had a class website to let me know the ins and outs of what their expectations were, what the schedule is, you know, how do I do this, how do I do that, that would be very beneficial. Definitely. So think about action storming too. Oh, let's see, could that be embedded into Google Classroom? So your Google site would be a separate URL, but okay, so one thing you can do is actually you could invite your students to be collaborators to that Google site. I worked with our advanced art at the middle school last year, and they were doing podcasting and media, you know, stuff and yearbook stuff. So what I went ahead and did was I had them become collaborators onto that Google site, so then they would have to keep up all the work. You could make a page for each of the kids too, so that you would have a Google Classroom or Google site, and everybody gets their own page where they can upload, you know, their work and things like that too. I'm a big advocate of Google Sites for each child too, like as personal portfolios, but I really like that idea of giving all students access so they can look at it together. That's really cool. But it wouldn't necessarily be embedded in Google Classroom. You would just house that link somewhere in Google Classroom, maybe under the topic Google Classroom. But that's a great idea. Let's see. I'm gonna write that in there. Yeah. So we could say, oh, I'm in that chat thing. Google Sites, and we could say, you know, collaborative students each page sharing work. Oh, I put it in the chat. Silly. Let's see, each student sharing work. Wonderful ideas. Yeah, and I think I did touch on the Google Sites at a previous session. So once all of these things are, you know, uploaded and available to you, you can get some of my templates as well that I created and some student samples. But it looks we're at 4:45, and I just want to thank you for both of you attending today. It's actually been really great to be a part of this and share. Of course, a lot of these ideas come from my own school district and from some of like my fellow friend educators, and I'm just so proud of how all of us have really been coming together and pushing ourselves to the limit to, you know, try out this new type of learning. And I hope you all can make it again. We'll be meeting again on Wednesday at 4. And so if not, again, hopefully you'll be able to access these things soon. But I want to say have a good night, and I'll see you all soon.